That's how I found myself sitting across from a woman I barely knew. A cheap silver-plated ring from a pawn shop, feeling heavier than a ball and chain on my finger, listening to her ask me to marry her. For real this time. 6 months before, she had been a stranger sleeping on my roommate's couch. A ghost in the apartment, all sharp angles and quiet apologies. Now she was my whole world. And if you're wondering how a man who had sworn off love, family, and basically all human connection ends up engaged to his roommate's chaotic sister after a half-year-long lie, well, you're not alone. I still ask myself that sometimes. Let me back up. My name is Leo. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've been the building superintendent for a mid-rise apartment complex in a city that never really felt like mine. It's a good job for a ghost. I live in the basement apartment. It's got one high, rectangular window that shows you people's feet as they walk by on the sidewalk. That's my primary view of the world. Shoes, all kinds. Hurrying, strolling, scuffed, polished. I fix things. Leaky faucets, buzzing refrigerators, jammed locks. I am a man of tangible problems and concrete solutions. Pipe bursts, I replace it. A circuit breaks, I rewire it. There is a logic to it, a satisfying finality. People are not like that. I learned that the hard way. 5 years ago, my life had been full. It had a different shape. I was a paramedic. I had a fiancée named Sarah. I had a future that looked like a blueprint someone else had drawn. A house, a dog, 2.5 kids. The whole thing. Then my dad got sick. It was fast, aggressive. Cancer. He was a carpenter, a man who built things to last, but his own body betrayed him in a matter of months. During his last days, in the quiet hum of the hospice room, he gave me his last piece of advice. He was weak, his voice a dry rasp, but his eyes were clear. "Leo," he'd said, gripping my hand with a surprising strength, "the world is full of people whose spirits are about to break. Don't you ever be the one to push. Your job is to earn their trust, not break their will." He believed in earning things. Respect, love, trust. He died 2 days later. And the blueprint for my life caught fire. Sarah couldn't handle it. She couldn't handle my grief, which wasn't loud or dramatic, but was heavy and silent. A constant pressure in every room. She said I'd switched off. She said I wasn't the man she'd fallen in love with anymore. She was right. That man had died in the hospice room with his father. She left. The breakup was quiet, civil, and it hollowed me out more than any screaming match ever could. I couldn't be a paramedic anymore. I couldn't stand at the edge of other people's tragedies, a tourist in their worst moments. So I quit. I found this job, this basement apartment, this life of quiet repairs and voluntary solitude. I became a ghost. I had a roommate, Mark, a grad student who was rarely home. It was a perfect arrangement. He paid his half of the rent on time, and I barely had to acknowledge his existence. And then came Clara, Mark's sister. She arrived on a Tuesday night in the middle of a rainstorm, looking like a drowned bird. Her hair was plastered to her face, her clothes were soaked through, and she was hauling a single, overstuffed duffel bag. "It's just for a week," Mark had assured me, looking apologetic. "Maybe 2. She's just between things right now." Between things, the universal code for a complete mess. I just nodded. It wasn't my business. I retreated to my room, to the familiar silence. But Clara's presence was not silent. It was a low, constant hum of anxiety. I'd hear her pacing in the living room late at night. I'd hear her muffled, tense phone calls. I'd find the coffee pot empty in the morning before I'd even had a cup, a sign that she'd been up for hours. She tried to be invisible. She would flinch if I entered a room too suddenly. She would apologize for taking up space, for breathing the air. "I'm so sorry. I used the last of the milk. I'll replace it first thing tomorrow," she'd whisper, her eyes fixed on the floor. I'd just grunt in response. "It's fine." Mark, for his part, was losing his patience. "I don't know what her deal is. he complained to me one night, while Clara was out on one of her long, aimless walks. She won't tell me anything. She just says everything is fine. But she's wound so tight she's gonna snap. Mom and Dad are worried sick. She seems fine, I said, which was a lie. She seemed like a cornered animal. Fine? Leo, she's a disaster. She quit her job, broke up with her boyfriend, and now she's crashing on my couch. It's been 3 weeks, not 1 inch. He saw a disaster. I saw something else. I saw the way she would stop to talk to old Mr. Henderson from 4B, listening patiently to his stories about the war for the 10th time. I saw her leave a small bag of groceries outside the door of the single mom in 2A who I knew was struggling. She did it quietly, when she thought no one was watching. These were not the actions of a disaster. They were the actions of someone who, despite being in the middle of her own storm, was still trying to shelter others. The 4th week bled into the 5th. Mark's complaints grew louder. Clara's silence grew deeper. One night, I came up from the boiler room, covered in grease and grime. It was almost 2 in the morning. The apartment was dark, but a sliver of light shone from under the kitchen door. I pushed it open. Clara was sitting at the small kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of papers. Legal documents, bank statements, spreadsheets. Her face was pale in the glow of her laptop screen, and there were tear tracks on her cheeks. She didn't hear me enter. She was holding a framed photo. It was a picture of her, Mark, and an older couple, her parents, I assumed, standing in front of a charming, slightly worn-down house. They were all smiling. It was a portrait of a life before it got complicated. She traced the outline of the house with her finger, and a single, fresh tear fell onto the glass. Cleared my throat, not to startle her, but just to let her know she wasn't alone. She jumped, her head snapping up. Her eyes were wide with panic, and she quickly tried to hide the papers, as if they were contraband. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, wiping at her face. "I didn't realize how late it was. I'll go to bed." "You don't have to," I said. My voice was rough from disuse. I walked over to the sink, washed the grease from my hands, and then put the kettle on. I didn't ask what she was doing. I didn't ask if she was okay. I just made 2 cups of tea, slid one across the table to her, and sat down. For a long time, we just sat in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Then, in a voice so small I could barely hear it, she began to talk. And the whole broken, terrible story came pouring out. The man she'd broken up with, Julian, wasn't just an ex-boyfriend. He was a real estate developer. A very charming, very successful, very ruthless one. For years, he had been the golden boy of her family. The one who was going to take care of everything. Her parents' house, the one in the photo, was their only real asset. Her father had been forced into early retirement due to health issues, and her mother's pension was small. They were barely getting by. Julian had helped them. He'd advised them to take out a complex second mortgage, managed by a company he recommended. He'd said it would give them liquidity, help with medical bills. They'd trusted him completely. Clara had trusted him. "He was so convincing," she whispered, staring into her mug. "He made it all sound so simple, so safe. He said he loved me. He said he was doing it for us, for our future. But the company he recommended was a predator. The terms of the loan were designed to fail. And Julian, it turned out, was in business with them. He got a kickback. Now, the loan was defaulting. The bank was threatening foreclosure. And Julian had swooped in with a solution. He had a buyer lined up, a developer who would pay just enough to cover the debt, leaving her parents with nothing. But at least they wouldn't have a foreclosure on their record. He was framing it as a rescue. "The buyer," she said, her voice cracking, "is a shell corporation. It's owned by Julian's company. He wants the land. He's been planning this all along. To get the house for a fraction of its worth." I just listened. The pieces started to click into place. Her frantic energy, her late-night research, her secrecy. "Why haven't you told your family?" I asked. "Mark? Your parents?" "My dad's heart can't take the stress," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. And Mark, he worships Julian. He still thinks Julian is the good guy, and I'm the crazy ex-girlfriend who's trying to stir up trouble. Julian has been texting him, telling him I'm having a breakdown, that I'm paranoid. She was trying to protect everyone. Her sick father from the shock, her naive brother from the betrayal, her mother from the panic. She was carrying the entire weight of it on her own. She had quit her job as a graphic designer to have the time to fight this, to find a lawyer who could untangle the mess Julian had made. She was burning through her savings, living on a couch, and being judged by her own family as unstable and difficult. The world was trying to break her spirit. And in that moment, sitting in the dim kitchen light at 2 in the morning, I heard my father's voice as clearly as if he were standing behind me. "Don't you ever be the one to push. There's a family wedding coming up," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "In 2 weeks, the whole family will be there. Julian is coming. He's planning to corner my parents there, to get them to sign the sale papers. He's telling everyone he's doing it to save them from me, from my irresponsibility." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying, desperate hope. "I have an idea," she said. "It's insane, but it might be the only thing that will make him back off. Give me enough time to find a legal solution." "What is it?" I asked, though I already felt a shift in the tectonic plates of my quiet life. "I need a fiancé," she said, the words rushing out. "A fake one. If I show up with someone stable, someone on my side, it undermines his whole story. It makes me look like I have my life together. It makes him look like the bitter ex he is. It would buy me time. It would make my parents pause before they sign anything." She stared at me, her breath held. "I know it's crazy," she said quickly. "Forget I said anything. It's a stupid, desperate idea."
I'm sorry.
She started to gather her papers, her hands trembling. I thought about my basement apartment, my life of silence and routine, the comfortable numbness I had cultivated for 5 years. Agreeing to this would detonate all of it. It would mean engaging, pretending, feeling. It was everything I had been avoiding. But then I looked at her, at this woman who was quietly fighting a war for her family, all alone. This woman who bought groceries for a struggling neighbor while her own life was falling apart. My dad had said something else once. We were fixing an old fence for a neighbor whose husband had just passed away. She hadn't asked us to, we just showed up and did it. I'd asked him why we were helping a stranger. He drove a nail in with one clean stroke. "Sometimes, son," he'd said, "people just need a quiet place to stand for a minute while the storm passes. You can be that place for them." Clara needed a place to stand. "Okay," I said. She froze, her hands hovering over the documents. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I'll do it," I said. "I'll be your fiancé." And so it began. The great invention. The next 2 weeks were a blur of whispered conspiracies and late-night coaching sessions. We had to build a world, a history, a believable love story from scratch. "Where did we meet?" she'd ask, chewing on her pen as we sat at the kitchen table, which had become our command center. "In the building," I said. "It's the most believable. I was fixing a leak in your brother's apartment. You were visiting." "Okay, good. And how long have we been dating?" "Secretly? For about 6 months," I supplied. "We wanted to keep it from Mark until we were sure." It explained why her own brother didn't know. It was strange. Somewhere in the inventing, the strangest thing happened. We stopped just inventing and started actually talking. She'd ask me about my favorite movie for our story, and I'd tell her, and then she'd tell me hers. We'd decide on a first-date restaurant and end up talking about the best meals we'd ever had. We were building a fake relationship, but the scaffolding was made of real pieces of ourselves. I learned that her favorite color was the deep blue of the sky just after sunset. I learned she had a terrible singing voice but loved to hum when she was concentrating. I learned she was fiercely intelligent, with a mind that could see patterns and connections I missed. She learned about my dad. She learned about my life as a paramedic. She was the first person I had told about any of it. She didn't offer pity or platitudes. She just listened, her gaze steady and understanding. "He sounds like he was a wonderful man," she said softly, after I told her his advice about earning trust. "He was," I said, and for the first time in years saying it didn't feel like swallowing glass. To make it believable, we had to practice. We went for walks in the park, and I found myself naturally reaching for her hand. It was cold, and I wrapped my fingers around it. It was just acting, but it didn't feel like it. The day before we were set to leave for the wedding, she came to me with a small box. "We need a ring," she said, her face flushed. "It doesn't have to be real. Just something." We went to a pawn shop a few blocks away. It was a sad, dusty place filled with the ghosts of other people's dreams. We found a simple silver band with a tiny, cloudy diamond. Cost $40. I slid it onto her finger. It was a prop, a part of the costume. But when I looked at it on her hand, a strange feeling washed over me. A feeling of rightness. It was terrifying. The wedding was held at a fancy country club. It was all manicured lawns and tinkling champagne glasses. And at the center of it all was Julian. He was exactly as Clara had described. Impossibly handsome, radiating a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He greeted us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You look, well." He let his eyes drift down to our joined hands, then to me. "And you must be the new man." "This is Leo," Clara said, her voice impressively steady. "My fiancé." Julian's smile tightened for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Fiancé? Wow, you certainly move fast, Clara. Last I heard, you were struggling." The word was a weapon, wrapped in concern. "I'm not struggling," she said. "I'm happy." The whole day was a tightrope walk. Julian was constantly circling, making little digs, asking pointed questions. "So, Leo, what is it you do?" he asked loudly during a lull in conversation at our table. All heads turned to us. "I'm a building superintendent," I said simply. Julian let out a small, condescending chuckle. "A super? That's great. Really great. A man of the people. I'm sure that's very stable." He looked at Clara's parents. "It's just so important that Clara has stability in her life right now." I could feel Clara tense beside me. She was about to snap. I gently squeezed her hand under the table. I looked directly at Julian, my expression neutral. "It is stable," I said, my voice calm and even. "I fix things that are broken. It's honest work. And it allows me to be there for the people who need me." I turned my head and smiled at Clara. Like Clara. The air at the table shifted. My lack of reaction seemed to unnerve Julian more than any angry retort would have. He had been expecting a fight, a display of insecurity. I gave him nothing. The real confrontation came later, during the reception. Julian cornered Clara's parents near the bar, a sheaf of papers in his hand. Clara and I saw it happen from across the room. "We have to stop him," she hissed, her face pale. We walked over. Julian was in full performance mode, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "And this is the only way to protect your asset," he was saying to her father. "Clara is too emotional to see it, but this is a clean break. A fresh start for all of you." "Julian," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. He turned, his face a mask of patronizing patience. "Clara, please, let the adults handle this. You're not well." That's when I saw it. The flicker of doubt in her parents' eyes. They loved their daughter, but Julian had been poisoning the well for months. They were starting to believe him. They were starting to believe their daughter was the problem. My father's voice again. "Earn their trust, don't break their will." Her family's will was about to be broken. I stepped forward, placing myself slightly in front of Clara, a quiet shield. "Mr. and Mrs. Gable," I said, addressing her parents directly. My voice was low, respectful. "I know I'm new to this family, and I know you trust Julian. You have every reason to." Julian shot me a triumphant smirk. "But I've spent the last 6 weeks watching your daughter." I continued, not looking at him. I've watched her stay up all night, every night, trying to find a way to save this house. Not for herself. For you. I've watched her spend her own savings on legal consultations, trying to protect you from things she doesn't think you should have to worry about. I paused, letting the words sink in. You've raised a warrior, I said, my voice soft but firm. She's not emotional. She's fierce. She's not unstable. She's loyal. All she is asking for is a little more time. Time to let the lawyer she hired do his work. Don't you think she's earned that trust from you? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse Julian of anything. I just told the simple truth of what I had seen. I testified to her character. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's father looked from me to Julian and then to his daughter. He really looked at her, as if for the first time in months. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but he also saw the strength I had described. He's right, her mother said quietly, placing a hand on her husband's arm. She's our daughter. We trust our daughter. She looked at Julian, her expression suddenly cool. We'll wait, she said. Thank you for your concern, Julian, but we won't be signing anything today. The mask fell from Julian's face. For one unguarded second, I saw pure, undiluted rage. Then it was gone, replaced by a tight, plastic smile. Of course, he said stiffly. Whatever you think is best. He shot me a look of pure hatred, then turned and walked away. We had won. For now. Clara didn't say a word. She just took my hand, led me out to the terrace overlooking the golf course, and burst into tears. But these were different tears. They weren't tears of desperation. They were tears of relief. I just stood there, holding her, my hand on the back of her head, as she sobbed into my shoulder. I was a quiet place for her to stand. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't felt this real, this present, this alive in 5 years. The ghost was gone. The drive home was quiet. The fake ring on her finger caught the light from the passing street lamps. The lie had worked. The pretense was, for all intents and purposes, over. She had bought her time. We got back to the apartment late. Mark was out. The silence felt different now. Not empty, but full of unspoken things. Thank you, she said, standing in the middle of the living room. Leo, I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, I said. Ido. You didn't have to do any of that. You put yourself in the line of fire for me. For my family. It was the right thing to do. An awkward silence fell between us. The contract was fulfilled. The show was over. I was supposed to retreat to my basement room, and she was supposed to go back to sleeping on the couch. We were supposed to go back to being near strangers. The thought was unbearable. Well, she said, hugging herself, I guess we can stop pretending now. She started to slide the cheap ring off her finger. Don't, I said, the word out of my mouth before I could stop it. She froze, her eyes meeting mine. I don't want to stop, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was more terrifying than facing down Julian. This was real. Clara, it doesn't feel like pretending to me. It hasn't for a while. Her eyes filled with a new kind of tears, hopeful ones. Me neither, she whispered. And just like that, the line between fake and real evaporated. I crossed the room in 3 strides. I cupped her face in my hands, the same way I had on the terrace, and I kissed her. It wasn't a practice kiss. It wasn't for an audience. It was quiet and it was certain, and it felt like coming home. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Clara's lawyer, a bulldog of a man she'd found through a legal aid society, tore Julian's fraudulent loan agreement to shreds. He found evidence of collusion, of predatory lending, of outright fraud. Faced with a lawsuit and possible criminal charges, Julian and his company folded immediately. They released the lien on the house and paid a settlement to Clara's parents that was enough to secure their finances for the rest of their lives. The truth came out. Mark was horrified and apologetic, his admiration for Julian turning to ash. The whole family saw Clara for what she was, their hero. She was vindicated. She had won. And through it all, she was with me. She never went back to sleeping on the couch. My little basement apartment, once a tomb of solitude, became a home. It was filled with the sound of her humming, the smell of her coffee, the clutter of her life intertwining with mine. At 1 month, we told Mark we were officially for real dating. He just laughed and said, "Yeah, no kidding. I'm not an idiot." 2 months, she took me to her parents' house, the house she had saved. Her father, a man of few words like myself, just shook my hand, held it for a long moment and said, "Thank you, son, for seeing our girl." At 4 months, she got a new job, a fantastic one at a top design firm. They loved her portfolio, her resilience. She was thriving. At 6 months, we were sitting in our kitchen, the same kitchen where she had confessed her desperate secret to me. It was a Sunday morning. The sun was streaming through the high window, painting stripes of light on the floor. She was looking at the cheap silver ring, which she had never taken off. "This was all pretend," she said softly, twisting it on her finger. I agreed, my heart doing a slow, nervous flip. "But it led to something real," she continued, looking up at me. Her eyes were clear and full of a love that still humbled me every single day. "The most real thing in my life," I said. She smiled, a slow, beautiful smile. "Good." She took a deep breath. "Leo," she said, her voice completely serious, "will you marry me?" I just stared at her, at this brilliant, fierce, incredible woman who had crashed into my life and turned it inside out. This woman who had seen the man hiding inside the ghost. I thought about the 5 years I had spent in the dark, convinced I was broken beyond repair. I had walled myself off, believing I was the kind of man who doesn't get a family, who doesn't get a happy ending. I had stopped wanting anything. And then she showed up. I thought I was helping her. I thought I was being her quiet place to stand. I thought I was the one doing the saving. I was so wrong. She was the one saving me. With every late-night talk, with every shared secret, with every quiet moment of trust, she was patiently rebuilding me. She was fixing the thing I thought was permanently broken. She was calling me back to life. She didn't just give me a reason to come up from the basement. She made me want to live in the light again. She was the one who had earned my trust. She had rescued me from myself. I reached across the table and took her hand. I slid the cheap pawn shop ring off her finger. Her face fell for a second, a flicker of fear in her eyes. Then I got down on one knee, right there on the worn linoleum floor of my basement apartment, and held up the silly, fake ring. "Only if you'll marry me too," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, laughing. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." I slid the ring back on her finger. It wasn't a prop anymore. It was a promise. My dad always said to earn trust instead of breaking a spirit. I tried to do that for Clara, but in the end, she was the one who trusted me. She trusted a broken, silent man to stand with her. And in doing so, she put my own spirit back together. She didn't just give me a quiet place to stand. She gave me a reason to dance. And I plan on dancing with her for the rest of my life.